Welcome to this week's edition of Taiwan Outlook. I'm Chao-Jen Huang. In recent years, East Asia has become one of the most important powerhouses of global economy, and that has to do with the very successful economic cooperation and integration among East Asian countries. And in this process of regional economic cooperation, the ASEAN countries has been the very important driving force in this process. So where does ASEAN go from here, and how does Taiwan fit in the picture of regional economic cooperation? In our studio today, we are very delighted and honored to have Dr. Chao-Jen Huang to come to our program to share with us his views about the ASEAN's future. And Dr. Huang is now the director of the Business Consulting Center and the director of Research Division of Southeast Asia at Taiwan Institute of Economic Research. Dr. Huang, welcome to our program.
Hello, Dr. Lo. Yeah, it's nice to be here.
The ASEAN just finished its annual meeting in Singapore this year. What's the important messages we can get from this year's meeting?
The most important message for ASEAN country is they are heading for so-called ASEAN community building. It is based on the so-called the ASEAN chapter last year, promoted by the ASEAN leaders. So they say in the future, they will build up the EU framework, style, community to promote the economical, social, security, and culture community for the regional people.
So are they copying some sort of EU model and try to borrow it from EU and try to copy here in the region?
To a certain degree, it's yes, because based on the chapters, they will coordinate, the heads, from the regional countries.
Yeah.
So they will establish so-called community. This community will have a so-called dispute settlement mechanism, and they will have a common economic vision, political region, and security vision for the whole community. So it's a kind of coordination and cooperation among these countries. So it's quite similar to that of in EU countries.
But as we know that the EU example demonstrates that it's a long-term process. It started with the economic cooperation, then moved on to social and political cooperation. How about the case of ASEAN cooperation?
Indeed, it's very similar to that of in EU. The ASEAN country might take, about 30 years efforts to implement, to establish so-called the community, But in contrast with the EU countries, ASEAN faced a lot of different and complex factors compared with, lots of factors in EU. For instance, the ASEAN countries, they carry, the different cultures, different religions, different economic, developments, so on and so forth. So it's quite difficult for ASEAN, country to bring together, unified, as, the scenario happened in the EU, areas.
But as you mentioned correctly, that ASEAN countries has more diversity than unity or homogeneity in comparison with EU countries. Let's talk about economic differences. You have very advanced economies such as Singapore.
Correct.
But you're also having a very, very backward economies such as Burma and other places. How can they do to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor?
So far, they use a mechanism so-called coordination and cooperation mechanism. So they recognize the differences among these countries. So they set up this mechanism is different stage of development or different stage of the cooperation. For instance, developed, more advanced country in the ASEAN countries, they will apply the so-called early harvest mechanism to implement the economic integration. In contrast, those countries is a little bit behind. In those countries, they will put the timetable a little bit lag, compared with the more advanced country in this region.
But there are many aspects that we had to deal with. Let's start with the trade aspects. Do you think that it's easier to start with the trade cooperation than physical or even the financial cooperation among
It's much easier, yes.
Yeah.
Because in 1992, the ASEAN countries, they say they want to establish so-called ASEAN Free Trade Area.
That's right.
So based on the 1992 ASEAN Free Trade Area Agreement, the very first 6 ASEAN countries, they will, format a so-called common market among these 6 countries.
Yeah.
So the tariff among these countries will roll down to 0 to 5%. So that's a tariff reduction. So it's a kind of speed up the movement.
How's the progress so far?
So far, after now, it's so far they run very good and very successful. So ASEAN 10 countries, about more than 90% of products already enjoy the low tariffs among these countries. Low tariff means 0 to 5%.
That's right. So you have pretty much a free trade area already.
Yes,
among
they
the
exist.
6,
Yeah, among 6, not only among 6, but also among this, the Vietnam and some country also joined this mechanism already. Yeah.
There have been some ideas or discussions about the so-called common monetary system or even common currency, ASEAN money and so on. Do you think that's a foreseeable?
It's very difficult indeed. Yeah. It's very difficult because the monetary mechanism will involve in a strong currency. Who will be the leader in this region?
Yeah.
The Japanese yuan or US dollars
or renminbi?
Or renminbi. Yeah, that's controversial issues. Because if you look at the history development of the ASEAN countries, we find there are so many legacies exist in this region. For instance, Japan invaded, the ASEAN country during the World War II, and the rise in China is an opportunity or a threat. It still exists a debate within the ASEAN countries.
Yeah. But in addition to economic differences, the most important thing is that there are also, political differences among the, ASEAN countries. You have democracy, in the Philippines or even in, Indonesia. Thailand, in some way, but you also have this kind of very authoritarian regimes in Burma, in other places. Is that an obstacle for regional integration in ASEAN?
Yes, last year, if you look at last year, they promote the ASEAN chapter.
Yeah.
One obstacle is the Myanmar's, human rights.
Yeah.
So many members of ASEAN members, some of ASEAN members, suspect the so-called ASEAN chapters because of Myanmar's human rights record.
Yeah.
So so far, for instance, you mentioned, Dr. Luo mentioned about the Philippines. Philippine government still suspect about the human rights in Myanmar. So it's how to deal with the controversial issues, in different members of the ASEAN, still a problem. Yeah. Within the ASEAN region.
Another problem that people challenge the ASEAN's ability to deal with the challenges is the decision-making mechanism that ASEAN is using right now. For instance, they have the so-called consensus mechanism. So everybody has veto power. Yeah. Is that a problem for the functioning of the ASEAN?
That's the ASEAN function designs.
Yeah.
Because, as we mentioned, because ASEAN region carries huge diversities within, the different members. So how to, reach agreement? It means that we got to, agree to disagree.
That's right.
So it's we got to set up a mechanism using the so-called consensus building.
Yeah.
So it can prevent any controversial issues raised by, different members. That's the way, ASEAN way or ASEAN approach.
But isn't that also an approach to put aside some of the controversial issues without trying to solve the issue? And does that affect the real progress that ASEAN is heading to?
So far, it runs okay. Yeah. Because, for instance, the human rights we mentioned, the human rights in Myanmar. So why the ASEAN chapter can move, based on the timetable, move, forward. That is, they suspend, they put aside, controversial issues, just like human rights in Myanmar or other countries.
Yeah.
So I say we move forward, and it's a kind of concept of early harvest,
That's right.
just like the ASEAN, free trade agreement. So they got experiences in 1990s.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they duplicate, these, models using in the ASEAN the chapters, and then to move the so-called economic integration or political integration, so on and so forth.
And how about the expansion of ASEAN countries? Apparently they now have many partners all over the world, including India, Russia, and so on. What does the ASEAN have in mind?
ASEAN philosophy is very, very simple and obvious. Their philosophy is using two words. One is open.
Yeah.
The other word is inclusive.
Inclusive.
So if we look at ASEAN as open regionalism, so it means they will invite the partners from different regions.
Yeah.
Treat them as a partner,
Yeah.
and then they will converge sources together and then show to the world.
Yeah.
ASEAN is a great power instead of small countries.
That's right.
There's no bargaining chips, so on and so forth. So it's a very important philosophy for the ASEAN to do as open regionalism and inclusive regionalism, to adopt India, to adopt China, to adopt Australia, New Zealand, and other countries.
But to play a more important role, greater role in world politics, ASEAN has to deal with the internal differences first. In other words, those countries have to coordinate among themselves in their foreign policies, in their external trade policies, and so on. So far, do you think that they do a good job?
So far, for my personal observation, it is. Why? Because if you look at the foreign direct investment, if you look at the foreign relations with the major power, great powers, you will find they play a very, very good job.
Yeah.
In the case of for instance, in the case of China do a lot of foreign aid to ASEAN countries. And the U.S., not only China, but also Japan, South Korea, and Australia as well. And the great power, they had done a lot of foreign aids, to ASEAN countries. Foreign aid means, the resource is free.
That's right.
Pour into this region and to help the so-called economic development, so on and so forth. So it's a kind of accumulate, resources for the ASEAN countries.
And without doubt, ASEAN countries or ASEAN in general has become a very important player in the region and also in the world. So when we come back, we will talk about Taiwan's relations with ASEAN countries. As we know that in the past we had the so-called Go South policy, hoping to strengthen our ties with those countries. So when we come back, we will talk about the achievements so far and whether there are difficulties lying ahead. So stay with us. We'll be back after this message.